Om Namaste. We've covered a lot of grounds throughout the seasons last year and we're still not done. Today we're continuing off from a previous episode about dying, DMT, and the afterlife by dipping our feet into a topic we haven't really explored in depth before, namely shamanism. Why does it exist? How did it begin? And what is it actually for? Put on your poncho and take off your shoes. Let's rave. We're becoming one with nature as we examine mycelium, plants, grains, flowers, bark, and tree roots. Disclaimer: the creator of this video do not endorse breaking the laws of the empire in any country and takes no responsibility for the actions or behaviors of the audience. Being able to communicate with or see spirits, having conversations with God, or peeking beyond the veil is usually frowned upon by society and is not recommended for any normal individual who wish to stay comfortably in the pod inside the matrix. Plants and flowers that grow freely in nature are classified as Schedule 1, 2, and 3 substances for your safety, health, and well-being. If you have questions about shamanism, do not consult your local doctor or general practitioner. They know nothing about health or well-being. Also, do not under any circumstances try any of this at home ever. By the way, did you know you're tripping a sober experience right now? Whoa, dude, mind blown. I am Isho, and you're watching Season 4 of the I'm Bored series on Alchemy Lair, parts of the Alchemy Labs productions. Let's begin this crazy episode. Throughout our short, strange, and often confusing history on this planet, humans have always tried to eat, drink, chew, smoke, or brew things found in nature that makes us feel a little bit different and funny, sometimes curious, sometimes euphoric, sometimes terrified, sometimes closer to God. And humans aren't alone in this. Animals do it too, sometimes accidentally, sometimes very deliberately. Birds eat fermenting fruits and get drunk. Dolphins pass around fugu pufferfish to experience mild neurotoxic highs. Reindeer seek out Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Cats lose their minds over catnip. Big cats chew on plants that sedate or stimulate them. Altered states of consciousness are not uniquely human. They are part of biology itself. From this desire, tribal shamanism emerges. A religious, spiritual, and philosophical practice centered around consuming psychoactive substances from nature, not for entertainment, but for meaning. The goal was never to get high in the modern sense, it was lifting consciousness into a higher or divine state. To understand life and death, to meet spirits, angels, ancestors, to travel beyond the body, to receive visions, to speak with the gods or God itself. Over time, this practice became formalized and restricted. Across cultures, priest classes adopt and guard these substances as sacred tools. Manna, soma, divine bread, ergot, wine, hemp, mushrooms, sacred resins, and fermented brews. These were not recreational products, they were ritual technologies administered under strict rules, timing, and symbolic frameworks. If we travel back thousands of years to Sumer and Mesopotamia, we find early evidence of beer, wine, fermented grains, and what texts refer to as divine wine. This wasn't everyday drinking culture. Access was controlled. Beer itself was associated with cosmic order, social hierarchy, and divine blessing. Altered states induced by plants were the domain of priests, healers, and temple workers, those tasked with maintaining harmony between the humans and the divine. Some Akkadian medical tablets even list henbane and mandrake, both psychoactive plants with dissociative and visionary properties used in healing and ritual contexts. These were not mistakes. These were deliberate and inherited practices rooted in the understanding that consciousness itself could be altered, navigated, and used as a tool. And from here, things only get more interesting. In the Old Testament and the Bible, we encounter a mysterious and highly controversial plant known as cannabosum, explicitly mentioned by name in Exodus chapter 30, verse 23. This plant is listed as a key ingredient in Moses' holy anointing oil, an oil used to consecrate priests, kings, and sacred objects. Later translators rendered cannabism as incense cane, sweet calamus, or aromatic reed, effectively erasing the original plant from the literature. However, the original Hebrew pronunciation of cannabism is phonetically almost identical to cannabis, and the recipe itself is anything but subtle. The biblical formula calls for 250 shekels of cannabism infused into roughly 4 to 6 liters of olive oil. That's nearly 3 kilograms or 100 ounces of plant material. This is not trace incense. This is a potent infusion. An oil designed to absorb fat-soluble compounds applied directly to the skin, scalp, and body. Now, botanical historians often insist the plant was Acorus calamus, sweet flag, or sometimes lemongrass. But sweet calamus contains no psychoactive cannabinoids, no resin, and no reason to use it in such absurd quantities. And let's be honest, modern scholarship has never been especially friendly to hemp in the 20th century. Big oil, big pharma, and big paper aren't really fans of it either. When we return to the Garden of Eden, whose location we explored in the previous episode, we encounter another botanical mystery, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the one fruit humans were forbidden to eat because it would grant awareness. Dead Sea Scrolls scholar John M. Allegro, in his book The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, argued that this tree was not a literal tree at all, but a coded reference to the Amanita muscaria mushroom. Allegro used Sumerian and Semitic etymology to suggest that many biblical stories were symbolic language inherited from older fertility cults centered around entheogenic plants and fungi. According to Allegro, Eden wasn't a fairy tale, it was a ritual garden. Archaeologist Diana Stein took this further, pointing out that the depictions of the Mesopotamian tree of life on Assyrian and Sumerian seals bear a striking resemblance to the serrated leaves and branching structure of the cannabis plant. Even more curious, in Sumerian language, the word for life is closely related to the word for intoxicate. The phrase, often translated as wine of life, may not refer to grape wine at all, but to a generic sacred intoxicant. The Akkadian word kunabu, widely accepted as cannabis, appears in Neo-Babylonian records documenting large quantities being delivered directly to temples for cultic purposes, including incense, oils, and ritual use. This wasn't fringe practice, this was institutional religion. Then we return to Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 to 31. We are given divine instructions traditionally attributed to the demiurge Yahweh, who we have established in previous episode is Enki and Vishnu. Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth. To you it shall be for meat. Every herb bearing seed given for consumption, no footnotes, no exclusions. Kane appears again in Isaiah 43:24, Jeremiah 6:20, and Song of Solomon 4:14, listed among the most precious aromatic plants. In Ezekiel 34:29, we find mention of the plant of renown, sometimes translated as peace, a phrase some scholars associate directly with the tree of life itself. Then comes one of the strangest passages in the Old Testament. In First Book of Samuel, chapter 14, verses 25 to 27, Saul's son Jonathan eats from a substance described as a honeycomb found on the ground. After consuming it, the text says, "And his eyes were enlightened." Some researchers suggest the Hebrew phrase Ya'arat Chadevash, commonly translated as forest of honey, may actually refer to a field of resinous cannabis plants, sticky with trichomes, producing a honey-like substance, what we today call hashish. Under heat, the resin compresses, forming naturally occurring moonrock clumps. So essentially, eating space cookies leads to enlightenment. Funny how that works. And with some imagination, we can think of Moses' burning bush story as a metaphor for vaporizing plant material inside a tent as a hotbox ritual where the flower of life spoke to him. Medicinally, today we know that it has mild psychoactive effects which can contribute to tripping states. Hash, which is a produce of slapping and rubbing trichomes together, making concentrate or wax, moon rocks, or resin press, a practice dated back almost 20,000 years. It is safe to say that the ancients were surely aware of the effects of THC and CBD on the body. It wasn't really until the 1800s and the 20th century that hemp-based products were pushed aside for the more modern petroleum, oil, vinyl, bakelite, and plastic era products of these last 200 years. Just like the industry refines resources, the medicinal plant containing THC is outlawed, while the 0% strains and CBD hemp becomes the new industry standard as to avoid people just buying it and using it recreationally. But not all countries apply the legislation at the same time. Some countries never apply it at all. And then comes the ultimate mic drop for the 420 crowd. Revelation chapter 22, verse 2 states, "On either side of the river was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations." 12 harvests a year implies a plant under constant or staggered cultivation, nothing like an apple tree. And notice the emphasis, not the fruit, but the leaves are the medicine. Cannabis is one of the very few plants where the foliage and flowers, not the fruit, are the primary source of medication. This oil was used to anoint priests, kings, and sacred objects. Isho, the Christ, is literally the anointed one. The Greek word Christos means smeared with oil. The Messiah is not crowned, he is infused. And this isn't unique to the Bible. In Hinduism, cannabis is sacred. Bhang is associated with Lord Shiva and consumed during religious festivals. The Atharva Veda lists cannabis as one of the 5 sacred plants alongside soma, barley, and ritual grasses. It is described as a gift from the gods, a liberator of the mind, a remover of fear. The ancients even infused wine with THC-rich plants, producing what we would today call cross-faded sacramental experiences, alcohol for the body, plant spirit for the soul. So the question is not why did they use these plants, it's why was it hidden, mystified, and forgotten, the fact that they ever did. All right, enough about the green leaf for now. Let's talk grain magic. In ancient Greece, we encounter the kykion, a ritual drink consumed during the Eleusinian Mysteries. Most scholars agree it was based on barley and very likely contaminated or intentionally infused with ergot, a fungus that grows on grains. Ergot contains LSA-like compounds, chemically related to the more modern counterpart, acid. And yes, this is the same pharmacological logic behind the medieval witches smearing ergot-based ointments on broomsticks and putting them up somewhere to fly to Blocula, the Blue Hills. Different culture, same chemistry, same altered state, shamanism. LSA, lysergic acid amide, is the natural precursor to LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. Compared to acid, it's less potent, slower, but deeply visionary. Those who consumed LSA-rich preparations consistently report experiences described as death and rebirth, loss of fear of death, timelessness, and transcendence beyond the law of death itself. Plato and Cicero both strongly hint that the Eleusinian initiation and digestion involved something literal, not just symbolic theater, and modern neuroscience confirms this. ego dissolution, visions, encounters with autonomous entities, and radical shifts in perception are textbook effects of lysergic compounds. Now let's rewind even further to Sumeria. Here we find Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. Her domain is not intoxication for fun, but transformation through grain. Sumerian medical tablets describe effects such as seeing gods, fire in the head, and the hands of the gods upon the eyes. This isn't drunk beer pub behavior, this is priestly shamanistic technology. In Sumeria, it is grain plus fermentation equals vision leading to God. In Hinduism, it becomes fermentation plus infection plus ritual extraction equals soma. Same formula, different mythos. Now, once again into the Old Testament, in Exodus chapter 16, verses 14 to 15, we are introduced to manna, the so-called bread from heaven. When the dew was gone, there lay upon the face of the wilderness a small round thing, and they said one to another, "What is it?" For they knew not what it was. The word manna literally means, "What is it?" This alone tells us we're not dealing with ordinary food. In Exodus 16:20, manna spoils rapidly and must be consumed fresh. In 16:21, it appears with a dew, vanishes in sunlight, and cannot be stored. That is not bread behavior, but it is fungal behavior. In Numbers 11:7-9, manna is described as seed-like, resinous, oily in taste, requiring grinding and preparation. This sounds far closer to fungal exudate or psychoactive resin than baked grain. In Numbers 11:4-6, the people complain not of hunger, but of psychic fatigue. They are spiritually saturated, bored of revelation. That aligns perfectly with ritual overuse, not starvation. Then we get the kicker. In Psalm 78:24-25, manna is called the bread of angels, not human food, not peasant bread, non-human nourishment. In Leviticus 24:5-9, we're told only priests may eat the showbread in a sacred space replaced weekly. Why restrict bread unless it's not just bread? In the first book of Samuel 21:4-6, David eats this bread while fleeing Saul. He is strengthened, not punished. And later, Christ himself defends this act. Interesting choice if the substance was purely symbolic. In Ezekiel 3:1-3, the prophet eats a scroll. It is sweet. Immediately afterwards, there are visions, spirit transport, altered perception. Symbolic? Sure, but in the ancient world, ritual objects were often literal ingestion tools. Sweetness is a recurring hallmark of psychoactive substances. And finally, Exodus 30:22-25 describes the sacred anointing oil, myrrh, cinnamon, cannabis, olive oil, applied to the skin, head, and holy objects. Priests weren't just praying, they were soaked in altered states before entering God's presence. Across cultures, the formula repeats: grain, water, time, ingestion, and revelation. Kykion, soma, beer, bread, and wine. The substance changes names, the experience does not. Death and rebirth, immortality, divine order, the covenant, the resurrection, same doorway, different signposts. And the question remains, was this religion or biochemistry wearing a crown? The hidden fruit of the forest has been patiently waiting its turn. So far, we've covered soma, Amanita muscaria in brief, ergot-contaminated grains, wine, flowers, oils, and brews. But now we arrive at the most obvious contender of them all, the blueing species, liberty caps, psilocybin mushrooms, the quiet teachers that brews blue when touched, as if reacting to consciousness itself. The earliest known depiction of something unmistakably mushroom-like appears in Tassili and Ajir, in the mountain desert of the Sahara in modern-day Algeria. Cave paintings dated roughly 7000 to 5000 BCE depict humanoid figures with mushroom-shaped heads, some holding mushrooms, others radiating the lines of energy. This is pretext, pre-writing, ritual art, suggesting mushrooms were already understood as tools of vision and transformation long before formal religion ever existed. In Sumeria and Mesopotamia, mushrooms are strangely absent from explicit mention, but absence does not mean ignorance. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, we encounter the mysterious plant of life, guarded by the gods, capable of restoring youth, stolen by a serpent, and then lost to humanity. It is not a grain, it is not wine, it is not cultivated. It is small, potent, transient, and knowledge-giving, a perfect symbolic match for the mushroom archetype. In Hinduism, the Vedic texts never clearly name mushrooms, and later Hindu dietary law eventually classifies them as impure. Yet symbolism leaks through. The blue or black nectar, Nila, associated with Shiva, is not bhang, not openly grown cannabis. It is hidden, forest-bound, rare, and dangerous. Shiva himself lives outside civilization, in forests, mountains, cremation grounds, places where mushrooms thrive, and his blue throat, stained by poison, mirrors the unmistakably blue bruising reaction of psilocybin mushrooms when exposed to air. In the Old Testament, mushrooms arguably fit the symbolism of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil better than fruit ever did. No agriculture is required. They appear suddenly after rain. They vanish just as quickly. Their knowledge is not informational, it is visionary. One eats and perception changes. Eyes are opened. Shame, mortality, and awareness flood in. Modern biology fills in the missing context. Many psilocybin mushrooms grow in pastures, often on or near animal dung. This makes them neither urban nor agricultural. They belong to rural landscapes, to shepherds, herders, and nomads, and suddenly a pattern emerges. The great prophetic figures are shepherds: Abel, Moses, David, Amos, and ultimately Christ himself. In Hinduism, Krishna is a cowherd, playing his flute in forests and grazing lands. Shiva dwells where civilization dissolves. In Zoroastrianism, we have Zarathustra. In Greek myth, Pan, god of shepherds, wildness and panic. Dionysus, god of wine, but also madness, forests, and ecstatic dissolution. Then comes Christ, the good shepherd, wandering the pasture, tending his flock, seeking the lost sheep. And if we follow John Allegro's controversial path, adding a symbolic twist, Christ himself may represent the initiation ritual: ingestion, death of the ego, descent, resurrection, and return transformed. The Passion narrative mirrors the psychological stages of a high-dose psychedelic experience with unsettling precision. Liberty cap mushrooms complete this cycle elegantly. Animals ingest spores while grazing. Spores pass through the digestive system. Mushrooms then grow from dung. The cycle perpetuates itself naturally, globally, without cultivation. Today, humans mimic this process indoors with spores and sterile substrates, selectively breeding potency, much like we've done with a THC-rich flower over the last century. And now, for the long shot. If Isho, the Christ, is the exoteric symbol and his teachings the esoteric integration of what one learns through such initiations, then his lineage as the son of David, linked to Moses and Abel, makes mythic sense. He becomes the carrier of the shepherd's sacrament, both symbol and shaman. But let's push it further. Moses shares the archetype with Thoth and Noah, lawgivers, preservers of knowledge, bearers of tablets and scrolls. The scroll is eaten, knowledge is ingested, revelation follows. The god of wisdom becomes symbolically a god of the mushroom, even if hidden beneath layers of theology. Then Europe gives us Saint Nicolaus, later Santa Claus, the folkloric remnant of ancient Yule traditions centered around Amanita muscaria, red and white, evergreen pine trees, reindeer that eat the mushrooms, excrete a filtered psychoactive distillate which shamans then drink, flying, chimneys, gifts, and ecstasy. This practice still exists in parts of Europe today. The myth didn't disappear, it just put on a costume. Legend has it that a man dressed like Santa would visit homes in the winter and give residents foraged mushrooms that they could all eat and enjoy. If Amanita caesaria was the loyal golden soma of emperors, mild, euphoric, regal, then the common psilocybin mushrooms became the golden teachers of the people, stronger than LSA in many cases, sometimes rivaling LSD itself. So here's my claim. As a scholar of alchemy and religion, I propose that psilocybin mushrooms are the hidden golden soma of nearly every culture and perhaps the most plausible candidate for the tree of life in Eden. Joe Rogan will call this the stoned ape theory, but we didn't evolve from fish. This is the stoned Adam and Eve theory, humanity not evolving biologically, but being initiated into divinity. If mushrooms were the teachers of the forest, then in North and South America we encounter another strange, stubborn fruit of nature, the peyote cactus and its extended family. Among many native cultures, peyote was not recreational, it was initiation technology. Combined with rites of passage for young men, long fasts, isolation, prayer, and ordeal, peyote accelerated maturity, identity formation, and communion with the unseen. And when combined historically with red, golden, and magic soma-type mushrooms, initiation wasn't gradual, it was forced open. The main active compound in peyote is mescaline. While it overlaps with mushrooms in its visionary capacity, it behaves very differently. Where psilocybin dissolves boundaries and pulls you inward, mescaline clarifies, sharpens, structures, and illuminates. You are not lost, you are instructed. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If we turn to Zoroastrianism, we encounter Haoma, often equated with Soma's cousin rather than Soma itself. Haoma does not behave like Amanita delirium. The descriptions align far more closely with mescaline-type effects, alertness, moral clarity, light, cosmic order, and divine instruction. Not madness, not drunkenness, revelation with coherence. In native North American traditions, initiation often meant going alone into the wild. No food, no tribe, no safety net, Spartan style. Vision quests, the initiate seeks their animal spirit, their role in the web of life. When the boy finishes his personal jungle book, he returns, not entertained, but claimed by meaning. He comes back a man. In Egypt, we don't find peyote, but we do find blue lotus. Chemically different, yes, but phenomenologically similar. Euphoria, lucid visions, erotic spiritual union, solar rebirth symbolism. Pharaohs didn't just drink wine, they infused it with gods. Now, let's put modern religions under the magnifying glass again and look not for plants, but for effects. In Hinduism, the Upanishads describe an inner light brighter than the sun, the self appearing as a radiant geometry, and Brahman perceived as structured luminosity. This isn't dissociative confusion, it's instructional clarity. Yoga, breath control, and fasting can induce this, yes, but historically, entheogens and adjuncts were part of the toolkit. In the Old Testament, look at Ezekiel chapter 1. Wheels within wheels, eyes everywhere, radiant metal, fire and crystal clarity. This is not mushroom chaos. This is not alcohol. This is textbook mescaline geometry. Ezekiel is terrified but alert, awake and coherent. He receives ethical commands, not riddles. This matches peyote reports almost word for word. Then Isaiah chapter 6, smoke-filled temple, overwhelming light, seraphim, purification, and moral commission. Again, radiant, sober, terrifying clarity. Hosea chapter 9 verse 7 says, "The prophet is a fool, the man of spirit is mad." The same type of accusation regarding peyote practitioners during colonial suppression. Same pattern, same dismissal, same fear of visionaries. In the New Testament, Paul's ascent to the third heaven in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 doesn't read like Amanita delirium. It's lucid, vertical, radiant. Mescaline again fits the profile far better. And then there's Revelation, attributed to John of Patmos. Intense colors, sacred geometry, beings issuing instructions, moral judgment, cosmic order revealed, Dharma by another name. Revelation reads like an extended peyote vision filtered through Jewish apocalyptic symbolism. Buddhism, interestingly, warns against intoxication and reckless shamanism, but early texts describe luminous minds, diamond clarity, and direct understanding of suffering, law, and rebirth. Some scholars suspect pre-Buddhist cultures had access to psychoactive tinctures, later removed for moral and monastic control. Now, peyote itself doesn't appear outside the Americas because geography matters, but trade routes existed. Names changed, plants changed, effects stayed the same. America had peyote initiation, Europe and parts of Asia had close cousins, Egypt exported blue lotus. Different botanicals, same vision architecture. And while we're still in the Americas, it's time to segue into the next sacrament, because if peyote opens the cosmic blueprint, the next brew tears the veil completely. Unless you're living under a rock or completely podborn, you already know the story. Rich CEOs, influencers, burnout tech bros, and wandering hippies from every corner of the globe travel to places like Peru to drink a bitter jungle brew. Some go for healing, some go for answers, some go because their podcast guests wouldn't shut up about it. If DMT is the vaporized crystal that launches you into a short-lived pseudo-death, then ayahuasca is the oral, ceremonial, extended version of the same molecule, amplified, slowed down, and ritualized. Different chemistry, same doorway, much longer walk. The brew reliably produces a recurring catalog of effects: serpent imagery, vines, ladders, DNA-like geometry, descent into underworld realms, disembodiment, full body scanning, judgment, healing, purging, encounters with non-human intelligences, sudden knowledge downloads, death and rebirth narratives, and an overwhelming sense of cosmic interconnection. Sounds familiar? It should. The serpent in the Garden of Eden suddenly stops looking like a villain and starts looking like a Kundalini rising experience. The same energetic ascent repeatedly reported in ayahuasca ceremonies. And since DMT is also naturally produced in the human body and can be increased through deep meditation, fasting, and breath work, it's no coincidence that mystical symbolism overlaps so cleanly across cultures. Now, look at Moses. He carries a staff that turns into a serpent. That serpent defeats other serpents. Then he forges a bronze serpent, and whoever looks upon it is healed. Is it really that far-fetched to suggest that the staff itself was carved from a tree or root rich in DMT-containing bark? The same serpent staff symbol later becomes the caduceus and the rod of Asclepius, still slapped onto ambulances and hospitals today. The modern medical symbol is literally the same icon as the Eden serpent, the Kundalini ascent, and the DMT vine cosmology, hidden in plain sight. Now, back to Mesopotamia, because this part is wild. Inanna's descent reads like a textbook ayahuasca journey, descent into the underworld, stripped at 7 gates, death, dismemberment, suspension, resurrection, and return with wisdom. The world tree and serpent motif appears again and again in Sumer, Akkad, Canaan, and later Israel. Ayahuasca shamans still call the brew the vine, the rope, the ladder, the serpent, same symbols, same map. In Egypt, Osiris undergoes the same symbolic cycle: death, dismemberment, resurrection. In Hinduism, we get Kundalini again. In the Tibetan Bardo Thödel, the soul navigates terrifying and luminous realms after death. In Greece, Dionysus, wine god of madness, ecstasy, death, and rebirth, shows up right on schedule. Different languages, same trip report. But here's the kicker. If ayahuasca is native to the Amazon, a region supposedly unknown to the Old World until Vikings or Columbus stumbled across it, how did identical imagery and experiential maps exist everywhere else? Because DMT plants exist worldwide. Acacia, mimosa, phalaris grass, and reed canary grass, and MAOIs, also globally available in the kingdom, Syrian rue, Paganum harmala, and Banisteriopsis-like vines. Did you catch that? Acacia, the tree that contains DMT, sounds suspiciously like Acacia, the Akashic Records, the storehouse of cosmic memory. The recipe was hidden, the plant names were obscured, but the vision survived, encoded in scripture, myth, and ritual. So why did it disappear? Because you can't run an empire on a bunch of hippies and people who receive direct knowledge. Ayahuasca decentralizes authority. It exposes deception. It teaches soul navigation. It dissolves the false gods. So Soma becomes symbolic. The serpent becomes the devil. The vine becomes cursed. And the tree is declared off limits. Imagine this. Hey, Adam, I just chewed some bark off this tree and my inner snake is telling me to eat some magic mushrooms. But Eve, Sky Daddy Vishnu said we'll die if we eat from the little forest trees. Adam, we're all going to die one day anyway, in about 700 years. True, you sound like a witch by the way, but sure, let's get high then watch Netflix and chill. And just like that, the oldest shaman and spiritual initiation on Earth gets rewritten as a crime scene. Stop right there, criminal scum. Are you trying to eat the fruits of the gods and live to tell the story? I'm going to wrap it up here so this doesn't run too long, but before we close, a few honorable mentions: ancient substances and mixtures that closely mirror modern psychedelics. Coca leaf, ephedra, kat, guarana, yohimbe, nutmeg, cacao, blue lotus, canna, mad honey, mead brewed from psychoactive plants, frankincense, myrrh, styrex, devil's trumpets, datura, belladonna, henbane, mandrake, salvia strains used by the Mazatec, and even scorpion and snake venoms, including royal compounds like theriac and elite potions of antiquity. If humans across every continent discovered altered states through plants, fungi, and brews, why do their visions sound so similar? If shamans, prophets, and mystics describe the same journeys using different symbols, are they hallucinating or reporting from the same inner landscape? How much of religion began as direct experience before it was rewritten into belief and doctrine? If ancient peoples called plants teachers, gods, or food of angels, what did they actually learn from them? If the same substances appear in Sumer, Egypt, India, Greece, Israel, and the Americas, was shamanism humanity's first global religion? Why do creation myths, Eden stories, underworld descents, and resurrection narratives map so closely to entheogenic trip reports? If Eden was a state of awareness rather than a physical location, what exactly were humans forbidden from knowing? If the tree of life offered healing, insight, and enlightenment, why was access later restricted or demonized? If priests, prophets, and kings were anointed with psychoactive oils, were they ruling through divine authority or altered perception? If Moses, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Paul, and John all describe luminous beings, geometry, serpents, and heavenly ascent, what altered their consciousness? Why do ancient texts preserve the effects so vividly yet obscure or erase the ingredients? If soma, kykion, manna, haoma, and ayahuasca describe the same process, why do religions insist they are fundamentally different? If shamanism predates scripture, why is it now labeled primitive, dangerous, or heretical? If early spirituality was experiential and decentralized, who benefited from turning it symbolic, hierarchical, and controlled? Why are substances that produce direct spiritual insight prohibited while belief without experience is encouraged? If enlightenment can be tasted rather than merely believed, does that threaten religious authority? If empires rely on obedience, what happens when people receive revelation without intermediaries? Why does the serpent, once a symbol of healing, wisdom, and renewal, become the villain? If trip reports survived as myths and scriptures, what knowledge was lost when the rituals were outlawed? If the human body itself produces DMT, was transcendence always meant to be internal, not institutional? Are visions of gods evidence of external beings or reflections of human consciousness amplified? If shamans practiced dying before death, were they training for the afterlife? If initiation rites once guided people through ego death and rebirth, what replaces that process today? Is modern society suffering not from too much intoxication, but from none at all? If religion removed the plants but kept the stories, are we worshipping second-hand revelations? If spiritual awakening once required courage, fasting, ordeal, and transformation, why is comfort now sold as salvation? If this knowledge was considered dangerous, was it dangerous to humanity or to authority? If these substances were once teachers, who decided humanity no longer needed them? If awakening brings responsibility, truth, and the loss of comforting illusions, are you actually ready for it? And finally, if shamans once crossed worlds so others could live wisely in this one, what happens when no one is allowed to cross anymore? Truth can often be stranger than any fiction. The topics we've covered and questions explored and the wonder they stir are just threads in a much larger, infinite tapestry. Take what resonates with you, explore the unknown, and never stop questioning the answers you've been given. Subscribe if you wish to journey further down the spiral into the forgotten, the forbidden, and the transformative. Together, we can seek wisdom that reaches beyond the perceived boundaries of belief.